Right now, in about 2 seconds. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight for tonight's City Board of Directors meeting. This is the 8th meeting of the City Board of Directors for 2018. And we have a relatively short agenda, but I know there's a topic here that will merit significant discussion. At this time, I'd invite Pastor Doug Jones to come forward for the invocation. Thank you, Pastor Jones. Please rise.
Let's pray. Our Father and our God, we thank you for the blessing of government. It's ordained in your word how we should conduct our business as a government. And Father, we thank you for giving us the opportunity to run our country this way and to let the voice of the people be heard along with the voice of those in administration. And I pray, Father, this afternoon that you'll help us to use good wisdom, help us to use good judgment and make decisions that are based upon what's good for all and not just good for some. I pray, Father, as we stand on the eve of the National Day of Prayer coming up this Thursday, that you'll just help us to be focused in on prayerfully doing your will as a city. And I pray, Father, that you'll be with each and every one of these members of the board. May you take and guide their decisions. May you give them conscience in their life to do things according to your will. And I pray, Father, that your will be done tonight. For we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
The city attorney will lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll call this meeting to order. At this time, I'd like a roll call of the Board of Directors.
Davidson. Jones.
Here.
Clark.
Here.
Williams. Garcia.
Here.
Foley.
Here.
McCabe.
Here. This time we'll consider approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda or items under the consent agenda you'd like to have moved to new business? Hearing none. Motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Agenda is approved. Consideration of the approval of the minutes of the regularly held meeting of April 17, 2018. Any additions, deletions, or corrections to those minutes?
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Minutes are approved. Recognition of guests. We have one proclamation to be read, and Mr. Denning McFadden, Public Works Director, would come forward. Proclamation, City of Hot Springs, Arkansas. Whereas it is anticipated that flooding in communities and areas in all regions of the state will contribute to the destruction of life and property, constituting a hindrance to the health, safety, and welfare of the residents of the state. And whereas in 1968, the United States Congress created the National Flood Insurance Program to mitigate flood damages and to protect citizens against potential loss of life and property, thus making affordable flood insurance available to all citizens and communities that participate in this program. And whereas the adoption and enforcement of floodplain management ordinances to reduce future flood risks to new construction in flood hazard areas is a requisite for community entry into the National Flood Insurance Program. And whereas Arkansas Act 629 of 1969 authorized cities, towns, and counties to enact and enforce land use measures, including ordinances to alleviate flood hazards and losses in flood-prone areas of the state. Whereas it is recognized that informed public officials and citizenry are better able to follow good land use measures and thus maintain the public safety and protect life and property against the hazards of flooding. And whereas information concerning flood awareness is available to the public through the Arkansas Natural Resources Commission, the Arkansas Floodplain Management Association, the Arkansas Department of Emergency Management, and the City of Hot Springs and other organizations. I therefore Pat McKay, Mayor of the City of Hot Springs, on behalf of the Board of Directors, do hereby proclaim May 2018 as Flood Awareness Month in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and encourage all citizens to become educated about how these potential destructive flood events may affect you. In witness whereof, I hereunto set my hand and cause the seal of the city of to be affixed on this first day of May in the year of our Lord 2018.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the board. I'd like to take 2 quick minutes to talk about flooding and flood awareness in the city of Hot Springs. One of the other hats that I wear other than Public Works Director is I serve as your city floodplain manager. This is a position that's required by state law for the city to be eligible to participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. You have to be a member of this program for the citizens of the community to be able to purchase flood insurance. If you're not in the NFIP, then there is no flood insurance available to the citizens. Flood Awareness Month is a public outreach tool in our tool bag that helps us maintain our NFIP compliance. We choose the month of May because it's one of the wettest months of the year, and April, May always brings the seasonal ramp up of our severe weather season. Downtown Hot Springs has a long history of flooding, with the last major flooding event being in 1990. That was 28 years ago. Back then, it did $5 million worth of damage downtown, and in today's dollars, that would equate to roughly $10 million in 2018 funding. We've had a history of flooding all the way back to the early 1900s. As a floodplain administrator, I'm in charge of code compliance for floodplain management and development ordinance, and review all building permits to maintain compliance with the NFIP guidelines. We have to submit yearly records and maintain records for elevation certificates and such. Additionally, our stormwater utility funds helps us with other flooding tools that we have. The flood warning system, the SGS flood warning system for downtown, is one of the tools that helps us. Our emergency weather siren system is funded by the stormwater utilities, and also our Code Red emergency phone warning system. The City of Hot Springs has 279 flood insurance policies within the city limits. It represents $52.5 million in property coverage, $316,503 in annual insurance premiums are paid for flood insurance alone. $188,000 is the average coverage per policy within the city, which results in a $1,135 annual premium that our citizens pay for flood insurance for that coverage. This is for flood insurance alone and does not include homeowners insurance. The City of Hot Springs joined the NFIP in 1978. We joined the credit rating system in 1973 as a Class 10. The credit rating system is we get credit and discounts on our insurance premiums for what we do above and beyond the requirements of the NFIP rules and regulations. In 1999, we were awarded a Class 9, which for every step that you step down, our citizens receive a 5% reduction in the insurance premiums. In 2006, we attained a Class 8 rating, which our citizens now receive a 10% savings on the insurance premium. With that savings, it comes to $35,000 a year that we're able to save our citizens on the insurance premiums because of our participation and of the CRS program and what we do to go above and beyond what the NFIP requires. In conclusion, any flood insurance or property location questions, you can contact the Public Works Office. If you don't have a pen, we're located in the blue pages in the front of your phone book under the City of Hot Springs. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Denny. This time we'll hear from Mr. Frazier for the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As many of you know, last week the mayor and Deputy City Manager Bill Burrow and I were in D.C. for the Chambers fly-in. The mayor's going to have more information about that in a few minutes. And also last week was the Arkansas City Manager Association annual conference, and that was in Siloam Springs, and Lance went to that, and Lance just finished up his term as president of the ACMA. And Bill's penalty for not being there and being in D.C. was to be chosen to be the vice president of the association beginning next year. So he's teed up to be the president one day. I want to thank both of you for your dedication and service to the profession of city management in Arkansas and in the nation. Appreciate your participation. That's an honor for Hot Springs to have that representation at the association. Also, last week was our drug take-back event last Saturday. The Hot Springs Police Department took in 158 pounds of pharmaceuticals, and the Garland County Sheriff's Office took in 798 pounds during that take-back day. These events help keep unused, unneeded, and expired drugs off the streets and out of the hands of people who could fall victim to opioid abuse, which is a major problem in our state. I want to remind people that you can also bring these items to the police department any weekday from 8 to 5 at our police department at 641 Central or 641 Malvern Avenue. Doing so could save a life or prevent the beginnings of drug abuse. Also, the City of Hot Springs has 17 openings for city residents to participate in a number of different city advisory boards and commissions. We are accepting applications until 5 p.m. on Friday, May 18th. There are 10 different city advisory boards and commissions that have openings. We need residents' ideas and experience at the table. Details are on the city's newsflash page at cityhs.net. Also, interested residents are invited to attend a Malvern Gateway presentation on Thursday, May 24th from 6 to 7 p.m. at the Visitor Chapel AME Church at 319 Church Street. Stephen Luoni, the director of the University of Arkansas Community Design Center, will be there to present a plan on Malvern Avenue Gateway and take public input on the project. And also the Pleasant Street Historic District residents and property owners are encouraged to attend. The presentation is co-sponsored by the Gateway Community Association and the City of Hot Springs. Also, the city's annual drinking water quality report is now available on the utilities homepage of the city's website. This report provides details on the source, content, treatment, and quality of the city's drinking water. We're pleased to report that the city's potable water continues to surpass state and federal safe drinking water standards. Also, we'd like to thank the Hot Springs residents for participating in this week's very successful Spring Fling citywide cleanup. And here's some big statistics. With 115 loads hauled and a total of 262 tons of debris were collected. Also want to thank you and our local businesses and schools for being a drop-off point for the event. Coca-Cola Bottling, Hot Springs School District, Lakeside School District, GBS Services, and Mountain Valley Water all participated. The free event helps keep unwanted items out of the landfill, facilitates neighborhood beautification, alleviates illegal dumping, and minimizes calls from directors with complaints about trash and debris, which we all know is out there. So I want to thank everybody for participating, including our directors who let me know from time to time when you see these issues. So if any of you in the audience see these issues, please report them to us, and we'll get people signed up to participate in Spring Fling, because our goal really is to be proactive and prevent enforcement action if we can, just by cleaning up our community. Also, there's a free homebuyer class offered on Saturday, May 19th at 9:30 a.m. at the Transportation Depot, the 100 Broadway Terrace. The class is sponsored by the Hot Springs Community Development Block Grant Program. It offers up to $10,000 in down payment and closing cost assistance for qualifying graduates. Lunch will be provided, and pre-registration is required by calling 372-2611. And next, the airport will be hosting a vintage airplane visit on Thursday, May 10th from 2 to 5 p.m. and Friday through Sunday, May 11th and 13th from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And you may have seen this flyer around town. It's called the Ford. And I've got a little bit of experience flying on these radial engine aircraft. The de Havilland Beaver was my choice plane to fly on when I was a fly fisherman in Alaska. And this is the Harley Davidson of aircraft. If you've never been around a radial engine aircraft, they're really cool. Just to listen to them. But this is a piece of flying history, fully restored, should be safe, and it's got adult rides are $70, children 17 and under $50. And again, for more information, you can go to flytheford.org, or you can go to our airport homepage. And last but not least, we have the Hot Springs Arts Advisory Committee, inviting folks to attend the dedication of the Indian and Maiden sculpture in the Monarch Butterfly Garden along a Hot Springs Greenway Trail. And this is located at Valley and Runyon Street intersection on Thursday, May 10th, 2018 at 12 noon. And they will be serving light refreshments. And I have a small photograph here of the picture. I'm going to pass that out so directors can see it. But it looks really charming and well done and weather resistant. So, Mayor, that concludes my report this evening.
Very good. Thank you very much. At this time, we'll entertain any announcements from directors on upcoming events. Anybody have an upcoming event? Or Director Garcia?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I would like to extend an invitation to attend a reception next Wednesday, May 9th, beginning at 5 p.m. at the Center at Forest Lakes, located at 305 Forest Lakes Boulevard here in Hot Springs, for Taku Onozaki, an artist from Hot Springs, sister city, Hanamaki, Japan. This artist is visiting Hot Springs on a sister city artist exchange. Not only an accomplished artist, Onozaki is also facilitator of the Rumbini Museum of Art, an art facility dedicated to supporting disabled people in Hanamaki. This will begin at 5 p.m. next Wednesday, May 9th.
Thank you. Any other announcements of upcoming events? Thank you. At this time, we'll entertain the items under the consent agenda. These are items that are routine in nature and do not require individual discussion. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. Got a motion by Director Jones.
Second.
Seconded by Director Clark. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Consent agenda is approved. We have two items under new business, and we have individuals who have signed up to speak on each of these issues. Just a reminder that we have a time clock that will count down from 3 minutes to 0, and we ask that you honor the time clock, and then we can move through the other speakers in an orderly fashion. Certainly recognize that there can be emotions on both sides of an issue, but we do ask that you refrain from applause and cheering out or booing, and allow the next speaker to come forward. So I'm going to call, multiple speakers at the same time, so you know what order you're going to come in, and so when that one speaker ahead of you is completed, that you can come up immediately and begin your 3 minutes. So thank you very much for your understanding. At this time, we'll consider resolution number R1862, and I'd ask City Attorney to read by title only.
Resolution R1862, a resolution approving an application for Modified Mobile LLC for a paratransit permit. That concludes your reading, Mayor. If you would entertain a motion second to adopt and have discussion, if any.
Very good. Motion to adopt?
So moved.
Second.
By Director Clark, seconded by Director Garcia. The staff member presenting tonight is Kathleen Lambert, Director of Public Transit.
Good evening, Directors, Mayor. Thank you. The Transportation Advisory Committee met with Modified Mobile, and this gentleman is the proprietor. They are a non-emergency paratransit service. So they provide rides to folks with disabilities in a non-emergency situation. They provide rides from their home, or they can provide it from a nursing care facility or something like that, to doctor's appointments, shopping, anything they might need. So they, in fact, carry customers similar to what intercity transit carries in terms of paratransit customers, but they serve 24/7. So if you have a situation where you have to, for example, get your, senior aunt to the airport, well, intercity transit doesn't go there. If you're a paratransit customer, these folks would help serve that need. So right now they have proposed operating one vehicle that can carry 2 wheelchairs. They have 2 vehicles available, but they're just going to start small. Their property also is registered as a commercial property. They will be keeping their 2 vehicles on their property in their facility, and then they have an adjacent building which they will operate a small office, administrative office. So these are part of the notes that were taken from the Transportation Advisory Committee as part of their application. So what we wanted to do and what the Transportation Advisory Committee recommended was that we approve this service as a part of the suite of transportation services offered within the city limits.
Very good. Any questions of Ms. Lambert? Director Garcia.
Not a question, but I just wanted to thank you for stepping up to provide additional options and around the clock, 7 days a week. Since my husband's become disabled, I have become more aware of needs of the disabled and some that aren't met within our community. And I really, I've met a lot more disabled people, and I've met people that needed dialysis to go to on Saturday, and the timings that people need to be places. We can't meet all of those needs, and you're filling that gap. And I appreciate it, and I know that many disabled people will really appreciate having options.
Well, thank you.
Thank-
Yeah, the reason we decided to open this service, my mom didn't drive at all. So if she had a doctor's appointment, then one of my brother or sister or myself would have to take off and run out to an appointment. If we couldn't take off, meaning that she had to cancel an appointment, and it might be 3 months down the line before she could have another
Yeah.
one. And she passed in December from congestive heart failure, so those appointments were important for her to meet. So we just ask you guys, please consider approving us for this permit.
Yeah, Mr. Smith, can you state your name and your address, please?
James Smith, 150 East Glazy Pole Road, Hot Springs Village, Arkansas.
Very good, thank you. Ty Smith, did you want to make some comments? So please state your name and address, please.
My name is Ty Smith, 150 East Glazy Pole Road, Hot Springs Village. Again, we just feel like James has worked in the medical industry for over 20 years and just met patient after patient that requested or commented about what a need there would be for something after hours, that just trying to make it around town after 6 o'clock, after the bus stops running.
Very good. Any questions of James Smith or Ty Smith? Thank you. Appreciate you. Any discussion amongst the directors?
Well, I want to, in the same vein as Director Garcia, having, excuse me, I'm going to pass because I've developed a cough. No, having developed some recent issues with my father in terms of his care, I know that this would be a worthy service to provide this around the clock non-emergency care, and I will vote for this.
Very good. If there's no other comments, please call the roll.
Jones.
Aye.
Clark.
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
Garcia.
Aye.
Foley.
Aye.
McCabe.
Aye.
Adopted.
The last business item to come before the Board of Directors tonight is to consider ordinance number 01815. I'd like to entertain a motion to suspend the rules and read by title only.
I'll make that motion.
Got a motion by Director Williams to suspend the rules, seconded by
Foley.
Director Clark. All in favor of suspending the rules and read by title only, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Approved. Council, please read by title.
Ordinance 01815, an ordinance establishing the maturity schedule for the City of Hot Springs, Arkansas Waterworks Revenue Bond Series 2018, prescribing other matters related thereto, and declaring an emergency. That concludes your reading, Mayor. If you would entertain a motion second to adopt and have discussion.
Motion to adopt.
So
Director
moved.
Foley, seconded by Director Williams. And Mr. Bill Burrows is going to
Thank
take
you, Mayor,
the lead.
members of the board. We have tonight Cruz and Associates. Bob's here to explain what this particular ordinance is. So let me turn that over to Bob Wright with Cruz, who's the city's financial advisor that has been taking care of the city's interest in this endeavor.
Thank you. Mr. Wright, thank you.
Mr. Fraser, Mayor McCabe, members of the board, good to see everybody again. Bob Wright, Cruz and Associates, the city's financial director, as Mr. Burrows said. We've had multiple meetings on this transaction, as we do on all transactions the city looks to undertake. And our last meeting a couple weeks ago, we showed you kind of preliminarily where we thought the final numbers on the financing would come in. We're here tonight to report, and we've got representatives of Raymond James and Stevens, your underwriters, to report the final results of the financing, answer any questions that you have on the financing, and seek your approval if we have met your expectations. I've been handing out to you as we've been going through, and we've been working multiple meetings with staff. Had a long conference call this morning with staff prior to our pricing. These are your final numbers, and it's similar to what we've been looking at, so I won't go through everything in detail. I want to point out a couple of things in this handout. On page 2 and 3, we've been kind of talking about market movement, interest rate movement, and such like that. Page 2, you've seen, this is basically what interest rates have done over the last year. And short-term rates, the 5 and 10-year type rates, those have been moving up a good amount. Long-term rates have been fairly stable. We're getting a flat yield curve is essentially what we're looking at on page 2. Page 3, though, I wanted just to see what's the market movement since March 1st. What have we been seeing here recently as we've been ramping up for our pricing? And you can see on page 3 that bottom right chart that shows the short-term rates are up almost a quarter percentage point. It's very good for your short-term investments. It's good for the city investment side. It did have a slight impact on our financing there, but the long-term rates are, again, fairly stable even over the last couple of months. So from your financing standpoint, from what we've been looking at to what we're going to report tonight is essentially the same. The underwriters did an outstanding job. Page 5, when we were here a couple weeks ago, we had a preliminary scale as to where we thought the rates would be, and we showed you a comparison as to what a recent National Park Community College transaction that was underwritten. What I've included in here today is a recent City of Springdale sales and use tax, which was $187 million, $188 million. And just a couple things to point out. We always price these transactions. We always want to see how we perform and how the city's debt is accepted in the market as compared to the municipal market yield data curve. And that's a matrix that comes out every day, various rates. And essentially, for instance, the 2033 maturity on Hot Springs, we were 88 basis points above the AAA MMD yield curve. On Springdale, the same A-plus underlying and AA rated insured transaction was 132 basis point spread over the AAA MMD. I think what that points out, it's not true apples to apples. There are different credits, but Springdale sales tax is a very strong credit, a well-known name. Hot Springs is a very strong credit, a well-known name. So you can see that on a comparison in the market, investors really took to the name of Hot Springs. You've done a remarkable job over the years in providing the information to the investors and to the rating agencies and all that. So it was very well received, and you can see all of these different comparisons, all of the different spreads to the market, and you'll see that you beat the Springdale transaction on quite a few of those. Page 6, this is the final debt service schedule. We locked in today with your approval at a true interest cost of 3.614%. That's a fixed rate now with your approval tonight. And even with the rates moving up over the last couple of months, that's still about $87,000 in interest less than what we projected 2 weeks ago. So again, I think it points to your underwriters doing an outstanding job. The questions we got from potential investors and such that we had staff answer for us, so it all ran very smoothly. So certainly came in under where we had been anticipating just a couple weeks ago. If you'll flip over to the tab, these are your final numbers, and you'll have this for your file. And I'll be providing staff a much more detailed set of numbers, dozens of pages of data and information. But there's a couple things that I wanted to point out to you, and it's really what was the mix of investors? What did it look like? What type of investors purchased the Hot Springs Waterworks revenue bonds? Even though the final size of the transaction is $20,175,000, they had total orders of over $64 million. So $64 million worth of desire to purchase these bonds came in. That allowed both of their firms and their desks to work with our desk, and they repriced, lower the rates, so that actually worked out quite well. They had 74 retail orders, and we've worked with, when we came up with what we call the priority of orders, what's the best for the city of Hot Springs for its residents that will affect the lowest interest rate. So if we can prioritize what we call retail, which is your moms and pops, your local people in Hot Springs and around the state and even around nationally, not your big institutions that are sitting there staring at a Bloomberg, that can lower the rate, your borrowing cost. So 74 retail orders, totaling $7.79 million out of the 20. So 39% of it was taken by retail orders, and that's a very strong number. That shows you that there are significant numbers of small investors that have confidence in the city of Hot Springs and want to invest their money with the city of Hot Springs. So I think that's a very telling statistic to show you that there weren't just a couple of institutions out there. There are quite a few people that have confidence in the city. One other thing I just wanted to point out as far as efficiencies, and you'll remember one of the meetings a couple of times back, we talked about how do we structure this transaction in light of this deal, how it mixes up with your existing debt and any future debt you're looking at. And we ran a number of different scenarios, but we ended up on this transaction by taking that more aggressive approach, and we saved $3.62 million in interest on this transaction loan by taking that structuring approach. And we've approved that with staff, with your rate analyst and such like that. And we took an assumption of any future debt and what that looked like by taking this type of structure and potential minimum savings of $4.6 million on any future debt. By looking at this and kind of taking a macro view of this and saying what's best for not just this one deal. You know, it could be easier selling it a different way, but if we set it up a particular way, it saves the city significantly right now, saves you significantly in the future. So that's the approach we took. Underwriters are able to lock that in, and with your approval tonight, we will be set to write tickets and send those out to the investors tomorrow.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Wright? Director Garcia.
Thank you, Mayor. On page 1, on the breakdown, when we had the work session in March,
Yes, ma'am.
We had discussion about that, and it was my understanding after that discussion that, and it was my understanding, it was your recommendation that we go 50-50 on the breakdown between Raymond James and Stevens, and I left that agenda meeting in, with that that I thought was the understanding. But if there were further conversations that changed that to not go into effect for this bond issue, I wasn't aware of it until tonight. And I didn't see it with our information in the last meeting, and I didn't see it in the packet until I saw it here in this handout.
Yes, ma'am, and that's, we did have that detailed discussion about that and the mix and how that's been in place for years, and how that might impact this financing and financings going forward. And it was my understanding in leaving that meeting that if the city wanted to transact that change of that resolution, it would have been further discussions. We kind of were in a time crunch to it was potential to get it done for this transaction, but it was going to be tough. But certainly was the discussion and probably the will of of staff, myself, and the board, our discussions going forward after this transaction to try to level that out, to have an equal distribution in both equal weight in the underwritings going forward.
But not for this one, because when I left the agenda meeting, I thought we had a consensus. And if something changed, I think it should have been communicated to all of the board before tonight. But it was my understanding both parties agreed to that there wasn't a problem.
I know we had discussions. If that's my misunderstanding, because I didn't hear any motion, I know we had that discussion. If there was going to be brought
we don't make motions
in
at
the
agenda meetings.
Yes, ma'am, at the work session.
I was of the understanding, just as it's presented, that for this issue we were going to leave it because of the way it was arranged. There was an alternating between the water bonds and the sewer bonds, and we did not have time to address that with both entities. But on the next issues, we would.
No, I didn't.
was
And
my
I think it
understanding.
should be included in all of our communications because evidently we have two different interpretations after that work session, and then it was never in any other communication. So it was not clear
Well, I know one
from
of the,
my perspective.
one of the
I may
factors
be the only
was
one.
that by the time we had that conversation, I think a set of expectations had already been in place for people that were interested. And I think my recollection is the difficulty was changing the rules at that stage. But I was very clear that the direction was after this transaction, we would go to 50-50. And that way we wouldn't upset anybody who's had already participated in good faith based on what their expectations had been on the way we've been doing
That was
things.
my understanding too, that, and it was a good discussion and the points were taken, and I didn't know that, to change that up going into, short amount of time leading up to this transaction, but I know that my understanding was going forward after that we would come to a special meeting or a regular meeting with amended resolution laying that out for the future going forward. I'm sorry if
Well, I
there's
would
any confusion on that.
but we need minutes or something from agenda meetings if we think we have one way and we're going to do something so we all have a common understanding. Because we haven't had any communications about that since the agenda meeting on back in March.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Any more questions of Mr. Wright? Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
We have a number of people who have asked to speak on this issue, and we'll first call on Pat King. Second will be Skip Houston, and third will be Bob Driggers. Ms. King, please.
Pat King, 219 Glade.
Ms. King, can you pull the mic down just a little bit, please?
Sorry, I didn't even see it.
Yeah, thank you.
It was over 20 years ago, shortly after I came to Hot Springs, I attended the Supreme Court meeting in this town where the Supreme Court okayed the city backstabbing the county and taking over when the county gave the city the thing, and then the county started backstabbing, city started backstabbing the county. Ever since then, the city has followed this perfidious action through with absolutely horrible wasting of taxpayer money on all kinds of things to support a water shortage that does not exist. And they've spent millions of dollars wasting money. But I would like to congratulate the city. They have finally done something good in wasting my taxpayers' money, having passed this bill the first time with blanks every time it missed money, and published it in the newspaper, taking almost 2 full pages in the legal section. We now have to fill in the blanks to correct that omission, and I thank you for supporting the newspaper so well.
Thank you. At this time, we'll hear from Mr. Skip Houston. Please state your name and address, please.
Sorry, I thought she would take longer. Skip Houston, 155 Five Point Circle, still in Garland County. You know, Pastor Doug Jones prayed for what's good for all and not just good for some, and I think that's the key issue here. The water customers overall have been kept in the dark about actual availability of water. There's been numbers thrown out, and they're hard to prove or disprove, but there's subject for discussion, certainly. The available water from current sources, the losses due to leaks and so forth, and other issues pertaining to water. There are significant questions that were raised at legislative hearings a couple of weeks ago, including sworn testimony about some of the history of the water system in and around Hot Springs. I don't pretend to be an expert on that. Other people are more expert on that subject than I claim to be, but certainly there are questions that have been raised. Water has also long been used as a weapon to inhibit county growth and in some cases to induce people to be annexed into the city before they would be allowed water service. One of the more recent ones out there around Thornton Ferry Road it comes to mind. You know, it's not like with water, it's not like citizens can switch over to another water company. With electric, I suppose you can put up solar panels or something. There's other ways people can, and they have a little freedom off the grid there. But water is pretty much in the city, pretty much take it or leave it. So there's not a lot of options to the citizens of Hot Springs or the ones in the surrounding area. There have been some recent increases already stated and some projected future increases that unduly impact the poor. I don't feel like that's been discussed fully, and there should have been more public hearings, publicity, and input before casting this huge expenditure in stone for future generations. I would question why it has to be treated as an emergency. I assume that has something to do with the interest rates on the bonds, but that hasn't been substantially publicized to the general public, I don't believe. You know, Hot Springs has had a long history of bad and corrupt government, and I guess charitably, at least you could say questionable government. There was a famous postcard, may still be up in the convention center over here on the wall, a blow-up of it that said Central Avenue in Hot Springs, Arkansas, a crooked little street in a crooked little town. I grew up here in the 50s and 60s, and it was an open city at that point, and you knew who ran the government, and they weren't very reputable people. I was away for about 30 years, and I hoped that it would be drastically different. I'm not pointing fingers or accusing him of corruption. I'm just simply saying that it just seems now to be a different group in power, and there still seems to be many of the same things done in the same way. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Bob Driggers, please. Please state your name and address.
Bob Driggers, 3 Stone Gate. As you recall, I was here speaking about this same item the last time you had a board meeting, so I'll not bother you with all of the things that were said there. Have any of you seen our video as to why this is not necessary? Apparently not. Go to ccc.center and look at the video. This project is overkill. What you're about to do tonight is the first of, I think, 3 steps of a $110 million project. $110 million. Well, it's overkill simply because of the fact, 2 primary reasons. One is you're losing approximately half of what you produce. Putting more into the system that's already leaking is not a good idea. For $10 million, surely you could fix the leaks. You wouldn't even approach 80% of capacity in what you're calling a shortage. The other item is, as we've talked about, you have 10 million gallons a day already contracted with Entergy at your existing water treatment plant. Sure, it's a 90-day rolling average, but that will get you through the summer. So if you could expand your existing plant, you wouldn't have anywhere near a shortage. You would maybe be 50% of capacity, which would take Hot Springs, which is not growing at all, 50 years probably. So you need to sell about 10 million, not 110 million, and expand your existing plant. Fix your leaks. You could do both if you're prudent with your money for $10 million. Now we know what you're going to do tonight. You're just listening to us because you're required to. We know you're going to vote unanimously. So my primary purpose in being here this evening in front of your bond council is to go on the record telling you that beginning tomorrow, you see some of the folks in the back here that are very good at gathering petitions. So beginning as soon as we get the ordinance numbers, we plan to start a petition drive to overturn your action tonight, referendum petition, and our federal litigation. Put that on the record.
Thank you. We have a couple others who have signed up to speak. Mr. Forrest Spicer will be next, followed by Mr. Gary Troutman. Mr. Spicer, please come forward and state your name and address, please.
My name is Forrest Spicer. I reside at 261 Haymeadow Lane in Hot Springs. Good evening, Mayor and ladies and gentlemen of the board, city manager and staff. I'm speaking in support of Ordinance 01815, and I serve in leadership capacities with National Park College, Hot Springs Metro Partnership, and a past chair of Greater Hot Springs Chamber of Commerce. The business community in Hot Springs metro area has developed 4 strategic initiatives aimed at 3 simple concepts: people, places, and things. The people has to do with talent development, which is retention and recruitment of young and maybe a little older talent in our community. Business development, the retention and expansion and attraction of businesses. Downtown development, which includes new businesses, real estate transactions, and new capital investment. And the third, with respect to things, is the quality of place to maintain and develop a lifestyle of pleasant living, recreation, and preserve the environment. Since 2014, our community has developed the following through a coordination of public and private initiatives. With respect to talent, the Chamber has adopted a young professionals organization to recruit and develop young people in our community for leadership. Several of those have been placed in leadership capacity in organizations throughout our community, such as the Chamber and Metro Partnership and other organizations. National Park College is focused on student success and partnership with Henderson State University. Also, a good representative of talent is our sitting 4th District U.S. Representative, Bruce Westerman from Hot Springs. In the business development area, we've had hundreds of new primary jobs that have been created and expansions of new businesses throughout the entire community, inside the city and outside the city. Downtown development has experienced 100 new businesses since the Majestic Fire and the Hot Springs Thermal Basin Fire District, with $40 million in real estate transactions and $80 million in new capital investment. And I'm here to invite you today on Thursday at 3 o'clock at the Vault. We'll have a ribbon cutting for the 100th new business in the downtown area. The quality of place, which has to do with residential, retail, and restaurant expansion, healthcare growth, lodging, and recreation for visitors, the Northwood, the Southwest Trail. We've had enhancements in the National Park Service, state and city parks and recreation, and the Tri-Lakes area. All of the success and growth in our community the past 30 years have sourced itself from an abundant water supply. In order for the Hot Springs Metro Partnership area to be relevant to our residents and visitors and future generations, provisions for a sustainable water supply and distribution is imperative. I thank you for your support, your leadership, and your investment in this program and this project. And thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Troutman, please come forward and state your name and address, please.
Thank you, Mayor and Board. Gary Troutman, 451 Lakeland, President of the Greater Hot Springs Chamber of Commerce. Just like to point out, spoke to you a few weeks ago on this issue as well. That evening I read to you excerpts of a story in the Democrat Gazette about Northwest Arkansas doing something similar that you're being asked to consider tonight. You know, the folks up there are not consumed with today and living in the now. They're thinking about their children, they're thinking about their grandchildren, and setting the stage and the foundation for the future and not just the immediate. We talk about other cities in Arkansas that have been very progressive and proactive. We mentioned Conway, we mentioned Jonesboro. But lately what's come into the conversation are smaller communities such as Russellville, Searcy, and Paragould. We find ourselves in a challenge to not just compete with these folks, but try to stay ahead of them in the economic development game. And certainly having ample water is one asset that would do that. This is really not what you're looking at tonight, but I think there's some hard numbers that are relevant to your decision. And we're going to go back to December and January to the base rate here in Hot Springs of our water. The base rate at that time was in the 98th percentile. There were 640, roughly, water and sewer districts across the state. And only 2% had a lower base rate at that time than we did in Hot Springs. After the 3-year phase-in, and if none of the other cities, and certainly they will, had any type of increase, we would be in the 79th to 81st percentile, meaning 20% of the water districts across the state would have lower rates than us. We'd still have, so 80% of the water districts would have higher rates than us, I meant to say. 20% would be lower. So you can see the numbers are what they are. We're asking you to look ahead to the future. Let's not be consumed in today. Let's think about the legacy we're leaving for our families, for our kids and our grandkids. And I would encourage you to pass this ordinance tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any discussion amongst directors?
I want to say something.
Director Williams.
One of the speakers mentioned earlier about 20 years ago when the city stabbed the county in the back. Well, I was serving as county judge then, and I don't remember being stabbed in the back by the city. In fact, during the tenure that I served from 1995 to 2010, we had an excellent working relationship with the city of Hot Springs and Garland County. Now, I know that a lot of people are patting themselves on the back now. Oh, things are good. Their trend has reversed, but it's still not as good as I recall. And another thing I want to say, I'm going to vote for this ordinance. I have no hesitation about doing that. But I also want to say this. When the emergency clause comes up for a vote, I realize that this is an emergency, but this is a very poorly written emergency clause. I understand the need for it, but it's not defined in this clause. So when the emergency clause comes up for a vote, I will vote against it. This is lazy writing on somebody's part.
Any other comments amongst the directors? Director Garcia.
For clarification, at our meeting 2 weeks ago, we approved bond issue, and tonight we're voting on the maturity schedule. Is that correct? And at last meeting, we had a letter from the Arkansas Health Department, and we are following the direction of the Arkansas Health Department that says we're doing and taking the correct actions. And so we are going by facts and data, is my understanding. And so tonight's vote's on the maturity schedule of the bonds.
Correct.
And any delays will cost interest?
Potentially. Any other
Thank you.
questions or comments of directors? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Clark,
Aye.
Williams,
Aye.
Garcia,
Aye.
Folly,
Aye.
Jones,
Aye.
McCabe.
Aye. Ordinance is adopted. We do have an emergency clause.
Mayor, that is Section 7 of the ordinance. I'll read it in its entirety. It is hereby ascertained and declared that the improvements are immediately needed for the preservation of the public peace, health, and safety, and to remove the existing hazards thereto. The improvements cannot be accomplished without the issuance of the bonds, and therefore it is declared that an emergency exists, and this ordinance being necessary for the preservation of the public peace, health, and safety shall be in force and take effect immediately upon and after its passage. That concludes your reading of the emergency clause. If you would now entertain a motion second to adopt. Have discussion, if any.
Motion to adopt.
Mr. McKay, I apologize. I was only reading the title. I did not read the final emergency clause, so I'm in error. However, it would have been better if that had been stated in the title, I think.
So moved.
Second.
We got a motion by Director Foley, seconded by Director Garcia. Any discussion amongst the directors? All in favor of the emergency clause signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay.
Abstain.
And we have one abstaining. The emergency clause is approved. At this time, we'll have directors' comments, board of directors' comments. We have any comments from board members?
I would just
Yes, Director Garcia.
say that it was very encouraging to hear there were requests for $64 million in buys in trying to issue $20 million. So that's very encouraging, in my opinion, for the city of Hot Springs and for future issues.
Well, the fact that 40% of the bonds are purchased by local people, I mean, that's a huge statement of their confidence in the city of Hot Springs.
Correct. There's no other comments from other directors. I'd like to just provide an update on a couple activities I've been involved in. On April 17th, City Clerk Lance Spicer and I attended a Southwest Arkansas Regional Leadership Conference. There are a number of representatives from Hot Springs and Garland County, and we were joined with equal representatives from Clark County and Hot Spring County in the various communities that are contained within those counties. The major takeaway from that meeting was the need to think regionally in your economic development activities. We had speakers of varied backgrounds. The one that, resonated with me a little bit more perhaps than the others was the gentleman from Northwest Arkansas who talked extensively about, their economic development growth and what their shortcomings were. We know that Northwest Arkansas has some very powerful Fortune 500 companies located in that quadrant of the state. However, they had weaknesses in that the road system was fairly non-existent. Those of you who would go up the Pig Trail would understand that. And they did not have much of an airport. And the business leadership in that town rallied and made efforts to improve in those areas. They also focused on what was good for the area was good for all the communities up there. It just wasn't a Springdale or a Fayetteville or a Rogers or a Bentonville. It was, as people say, you don't say you're from there, you're from Northwest Arkansas. Mm-hmm. And so that's a regional. And there's some discussion amongst how does that translate to the counties and the communities that reside within Garland County, Hot Spring County, and Clark County. Garland, Hot Springs, and Garland County is the population center of that three. Those other counties are relatively small, and the communities there are really relatively small. So from one standpoint, we certainly should be considered the 800-pound gorilla in that room. But at the same time, those communities have certain assets that we don't have. And the rail system, interstate, some 4-year colleges are in those communities. And so we can work and dovetail our strengths with their weaknesses and their strengths with our weaknesses and become a more powerful economic force if we work together. I know Mr. Troutman at the Chamber and Metro Partnership has talked about the standard metropolitan statistical area, and while we might not count as such, if we do market ourselves as a region, utilizing those individual strengths that each county and community within those counties present, along with our populations, that can be a very attractive package to industries relocating to our area. And Mr. Spicer made a comment about quality of place earlier, and that was discussed at length. People are looking for quality of place, and the young people today are looking for quality of place, and we have quality of place here within those counties. And so for us to tap that as we use that in our economic messaging is can be quite attractive for a number of companies. And so last week at this time, we were in Washington, D.C., Mr. Frazier, Bill Burrows, and myself, along with about 37 other business individuals from Hot Springs and Garland County. And the Chamber set up a great array of speakers that we listened to throughout the they were back-to-back on Tuesday afternoon. And hate to do a pun on words at this hour of the night, but we were literally trumped by the president of France coming to town. And so some of our individual meetings got reshuffled with speakers, and the Bill had done a great job in coordinating some meetings with Congressman Womack, who couldn't make his meeting, but he sent a very able staff member. He had an activity with the president of France, and so we sent we had messaging to Congressman Womack's staff regarding the continuation of community development block grant funding through the First and Main program. And there's a real concern amongst communities across the country that the reduction of funding that supports core community redevelopment, is on the chopping block in lieu of doing an 80-20 match where it's 80% federal, 20% community, that it could be the other way, and 80% community, 20% federal. And we wanted to send a strong message that that would curtail revitalization of core areas of our community, which includes poorer areas of communities across the country. There are other funding mechanisms that are relatively consistent with community development block grants that would be affected as well. We sat down with with Senator Bozeman's staff as well immediately following that meeting and delivered the same message. And then later that afternoon, we had a meeting with Senator Bozeman to talk about issues that were specific to Hot Springs. Those items relate to internet sales tax and the need for that to be, collected for communities across the country. That's in the Supreme Court now, at least from one community or one state, has taken it to Supreme Court. So everybody's waiting for that decision to be handed down. High-speed broadband. It was an issue that we talked about, and we're sitting there in Senator Bozeman's office, just a couple feet away in a circle, having these discussions, and it was, things really tied together. A couple weeks ago, Mr. Frazier and I attended a meeting in Little Rock with the governor when he rolled out, his pillars for economic development and challenged communities to self-assess themselves on their ability to attract business, and are you ready to accept a business proposal? Well, I looked right at Senator Bozeman and said, we have so much to offer, but we do not have high-speed broadband, and we need help in that regard. We have quality of place. We have all these other strengths. But if we're going to attract a 33-year-old who's a up and coming tech giant, and he wants to do mountain biking, and this is exact words I was telling Senator Bozeman, we have the best mountain biking in the country. But once he does his review to see what he can connect to on the internet, we're going to lose him. So these are the things that Senator Bozeman heard from us, and that he's very, very sensitive to. Bill did a masterful job outlining where we're at with the Lake DeGray water project, and Senator Bozeman's been on top of that. He welcomes those type of updates, and his staff takes detailed notes when Bill was providing that overview. So we had some great meetings, with the congressional staff. We had a great meeting with Senator Bozeman, And, these meetings, going to Washington, there is a cost to that, and sometimes people will question, well, why can't you just write a letter? Why can't you just, send an email? Director Foley made a comment about a month or two ago. You do business with people you have a relationship with. And if you have a relationship, they're more apt to take your call, more apt to read future correspondence after you have developed that relationship. I went there as mayor. David was there as city manager, and Bill was there as deputy city manager. But when you walk in the door and people say, this is the mayor of Hot Springs, I'm just a regular Joe. But from that standpoint of having the mayor come to the senator's office, or the mayor comes to the congressman's office, that demonstrates to that staff person, as well as the senator and the congressman, that this community feels it's important to get their message out, and the mayor feels it's important, so they're there. And so, again, we're all sensitive to expenditure of dollars, but those dollars are going to come back to this community. And over time, as we continue to develop relationships and continue to educate. Now, I will say that if Bill ever wants to retire here and become a tour guide of the Capitol complex, we were down in the caverns, and he found his way around, and all of a sudden we popped up, and it was like Senator Bozeman's office. I'm like, where are we? I mean, there was like no windows. If I had a compass, I still would be down there trying to figure out where the door is. So we had some great meetings, and one of the things that the chamber had set up was a speaker by the name of Mr. Michael Platt, who's they got long titles, Assistant Secretary for the Office of Legislative Intergovernmental Affairs at the U.S. Department of Commerce. One of the concerning takeaways, and he's just discussing policy and where they're at, there was discussion amongst the Hot Springs delegation with him regarding high-speed broadband. And his comment was, we want to get everybody in the country connected before we worry about those who are connected wanting to have, higher speed, higher bandwidth. And that was a very concerning comment to those of us in the room. And, and so the meeting we had with Senator Bozeman, David and Bill and I think that was important, and we talked about that comment with Senator Bozeman. So we have a friend in Senator Bozeman. We have a friend in Congressman Womack. Congressman Womack certainly up from Northwest Arkansas. You might say why we're meeting with Congressman Womack, and he's on the Appropriations Committee, and so it's important for us to talk to our delegation members who have those important seats in Congress. And so overall, I think it was a trip well worth every nickel that was spent, and it's something that we need to be at and be involved in each and every year. So those are my comments, and I apologize for taking too long, but that's a detailed overview of what we discussed while we were there. Any further comments of directors?
May I have one thing I'd like to say about the arts in the park? Yesterday, the Gateway community participated in a tour, and it started at Visitors Chapel Church and made the round. And when they got to the, I still call it the Baptist building, somebody wanted to go upstairs, and they let them go up there and look at the 4th floor. And now everything's buzzing about what can be done with that 4th floor and how we're going to afford $1 million elevator, which I said, oh, that's no problem. We'll get the money for that. And then they came all around to the Webb House, and they really enjoyed the tour, and they stopped at Webb Center for some water and some bologna sandwiches. But they had a good time, and everybody was really impressed about what's going on because the house in front of Webb Center, which is going to be a museum, I don't want to mess his name up, they've already replaced the roof on it and the shingles. So it's going to work out. I was really impressed. I couldn't walk, but I could talk. Thank you, Mayor.
Director Foley?
This past weekend, I also attended an Art in the Park function honoring Gary Simmons, who has his work on display. If people in this community have not been to the museum lately, they really need to go out there. The dinosaurs are set. I know they're going to have a grand opening for it, but the whole facility is in such good shape. I just have to commend them for the professional look throughout the museum as well as the exhibits. So I know they're looking for forward to the future too for growth, and I hope we can help them somehow.
Great.
Thank you, Mayor.
Director Jones, do you have anything?
I just gave you my report. Oh, I moved that we adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
Second.
Seconded by Director Williams. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
You know I was away.